It's cheap and ours everywhere. But most of us, and especially children, have no idea how dangerous it is.
Tonight we'll bring that message home, and we'll answer the questions, what does crack do to the mind and body, and why is it the most addictive drug in history? Tom Jarrell has a report that takes us beyond the crack house raids. And if you've ever thought of trying crack, this will cure you.
It is, in every sense of the word, suicide, slow suicide. The only thing is, in suicide, with suicide, it's like quick. This is slow death.
All of us are at risk of becoming addicted to a drug like this.
It's an old drug being taken in a new way, and an old drug being taken a new way is big trouble.
Crack is simply cocaine, but in a different form. Rather than a white powder that is snorted into the nose, crack is cocaine chemically made into smokable rocks. And because it's smoked, it's virtually a different drug, or more powerful drug, with all the crack rushing like a speeding train to the brain and hitting with a powerful jolt in just seconds. Scattered about the nation's cities are places where they come to smoke crack, like this abandoned building in New York, where they smoke crack in homemade pipes. There, we met Maria.
Feel it?
A little bit. Let me keep on puffing. Now I'm feeling it. It's like I feel like dizzy, like...
Feel good?
Rush. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Doctors believe the crack rushes directly to the brain's pleasure centers, releasing a chemical called dopamine. That same chemical is released in small amounts when we do anything that makes us happy. But with crack, a flood of dopamine rushes out and stays there. You feel euphoric.
Basically, when patients describe this experience of smoked cocaine, they often describe it in sexual terms, and that's really no accident, because cocaine is acting on the same systems in the brain that provide pleasure.
The first time, I really got it when this girl, she prepared it for me, and she told me, here, blow. And I went, and I was lying down, and I said, oh God, what is this? And I was like, oh. I said, this is what it is.
In a hospital in Philadelphia, Bill Tyrone's vital signs are closely monitored.
Are you feeling any high on a scale of 1 to 10?
1.
Okay, thank you.
Bill is about to relive what had become the nightmare of his life. In the last 2 years, this highly paid and highly trained computer whiz became hopelessly addicted to smoked cocaine, to crack.
You will hurt everybody that cares for you, and you will eventually kill yourself.
Bill Tyrone is now trying to save his life, ironically by reenacting what destroyed it, using a harmless substance that looks like but is not crack. But there are no guarantees that even this startling technique will break the stranglehold of crack.
It's a very powerful experience, and basically it has no comparison in everyday experience. And because it has no comparison, it's very hard to forget.
It's so hard to forget that after smoking crack only once, you may be unleashing an instant addiction, something that rarely happens with any other drug. You will feel compelled to smoke crack again and again, especially since the high lasts only seconds.
So instead of having a long period of gratification, essentially a breather between the need to use, there's no breather. Basically, the desire to use more comes right after the feelings of being intensely high.
And with crack, you can satisfy that desire because it's so available and because, at least at first, it's so affordable, just $10 for a crack rock. This, too, sets crack apart from other drugs, so that those who try it quickly find themselves drowning in addiction. Bill, Emerald, and Steve are all in their 20s, and all were professionals beginning careers that showed much promise. But today, they're all recovering crack addicts, all trying to rebuild ruined lives. They're from different New York neighborhoods, but with one thing in common: crack.
Bill, did you think that you ever would or could become addicted to a drug that you were using? No, I didn't. I never thought in a million years that me, Billy, would get addicted to crack. I was really against it at first. You know, when I'd see the dealers out on the corner dealing and everything, and, you know, I'd bring my dogs down and I'd scare them away from the front of the building and stuff. And, you know, I never thought that I would be the one hiding in the corner in the house smoking. You know, that's not me, that's somebody else.
But they were all using other drugs and kept hearing that smoking crack was the ultimate high. They each figured they should give it a try.
The high, the euphoria, has been described by some as like having a sexual orgasm, low to the point of depression. How long did this sense of euphoria last?
About 60 seconds.
That short?
Yes, that's short.
And then?
And then I wanted another hit.
I would actually deceive myself, you know, and say, well, today I've got $300 in my pocket, you know, I'll spend $30. And as soon as I finish those three, you know, it's, oh, well, what the heck, I'll go back and buy another 5, you know. And then I'd find myself running back and forth all night long until all the money is gone.
When the money ran out, I sold all my jewelry, sold all my family's jewelry, all my mother's rings and my father's rings and all his chains and stuff to get high with.
Were any of your friends able to handle the addiction of crack that you know of? To smoke crack and not fall into the same dark hole that you fell into?
No, because the drug is so addicting. Once you try it, you're hooked to it.
The first pull off that pipe was instant addiction.
Jim Sloan is old enough to be Steve's father. An engineer with a family, he's part of the new population of addicts this drug is ensnaring, so unlike any doctors have seen before. Stable, middle-aged people, even people who have never used other drugs.
It's so overpowering, it just comes before any and everything, in any and everybody. I mean, I have kids that I've been devoted to from the time they were born all the way up until now. But, no matter what they needed, that drug came first.
Jim saw he was destroying everything he had worked so hard for. But the worse things got, the more he felt compelled to smoke cocaine.
You get depressed and you would get high to get over the depression. And then you would crash and you would get depressed again and you had to get high to get over the depression. And it just got to a point to where you didn't get high, really. I mean, you got high in the physical sense, but you got no pleasure out of it. It was basically just to get over the depression.
As Jim Sloan learned, smoking cocaine plays a mean trick on you. Doctors now believe that chronic smoking depletes the brain's supply of dopamine, making you numb to normal pleasures. And so you turn more and more to crack. It becomes the most vicious of vicious cycles.
After you went through that cycle a few times, you get very, very suicidal. Start thinking about death all the time. But basically, you want to just go somewhere and get high and die.
But how do you break the stranglehold of this insidious white rock, crack, before it's too late? Doctors aren't sure yet. For years, drug treatment has relied heavily on detoxification, counseling, and self-help programs modeled after Alcoholics Anonymous. Doctors say these methods are important for treating crack abusers, but they're finding they're not nearly enough. So far, 100% of our patients have had at least one relapse at some point along the way, usually within the first few weeks to few months after they left the hospital.
With Jim Sloan, it happened even faster.
I was so positive when I came out of the program, you know. Hey, this is great. I got this over with. I'm detoxed. I'm clean. It's behind me. I walked out the door and went right out and got high. First day.
They sometimes take it as a sign of weakness or a sign of less motivation. It has nothing to do with motivation. In fact, that's just the thing. You could be extremely motivated, have the best of intentions, but the vulnerability is there.
Doctors now believe that even after you stop smoking crack, the memory of how good it once felt does not stop. A memory so powerful that it masks the hellish side of the drug. A memory so deeply entrenched in the brain that a craving for crack can sneak up on you and be set off unexpectedly. Imagine as a child your mother brought you to this ice cream parlor, and like most kids, you developed a love for ice cream.
Over a period of time, you might form a powerful subconscious association between the sight of the ice cream parlor and your desire for ice cream. And anytime you see it, you'd suddenly and unexpectedly crave ice cream. And you'd probably come in for a cone. Thank you. It's what psychologists call a learned association. Every time you see the parlor, you'd have a craving for ice cream. But imagine one day you realize the power seeing the parlor has over you, and you want to break it. Now when you see it, you still want ice cream, but you fight the craving, and you walk right by. If you do this enough over time, you'd likely find the parlor setting off less and less a craving for ice cream. For crack addicts, everything can be that ice cream parlor, but impossible to walk by. It could be a song you heard when smoking, or money, or for Emerald, the clock on the wall reading 5:30, the time she used to leave work and begin smoking. But Dr. Anna Rose Childress has devised a program at the Philadelphia VA hospital to help crack addicts control the craving unleashed by those ever-present triggers.
Wow, that's a bell ringer there, man. I feel it in my ears.
Recovering addicts are exposed to the most common triggers of a craving for crack. Here, Bill Tyrone watches a film of people smoking crack.
My mouth started watering, and it felt as though I was getting high, but I wasn't getting high. After watching a film like that, if they would have let me go right now, I'd probably go out and get high.
But in the hospital, he can't get high. He can't satisfy the craving, which the film triggers. And repeating this over and over, doctors see evidence that his craving is diminishing, but not disappearing. Even after hours of exposure, some craving is still aroused by the common triggers.
Theta decreased in there.
To help control that craving, doctors are now experimenting with two varieties of drugs. One, drugs that would block the euphoric effects of smoke cocaine, make it less pleasurable, and hopefully make recovering addicts crave it less. And two, drugs that would help restore the brain's ability to experience normal pleasure, relieving the harrowing depression that often keeps crack smokers in a cycle of addiction. But doctors doubt they'll ever be able to completely destroy the powerful memory of the crack high, a persecutory memory, doctors call it, one that may haunt and persecute you forever.
And at any time, that memory of what the feeling of that reward, that pleasure was like, can pop up and trigger intense desire for the drug again. So they've eaten the apple, they can't go back, they know what it feels like, and they are no longer innocent, basically. They know the feeling, and they're forever plagued by that knowledge, in a sense.
But now they also know how vulnerable they are, and that knowledge could ultimately help break their addiction. Bill Tyrone has left the hospital and is now back to designing computer systems. Jim Sloan's also back working and has been drug-free for almost a year. And Bill, Emerald, and Steve are in treatment at Phoenix House, preparing to return to a world where crack is available around every corner. Maria, the woman we met in the crack house in the abandoned building, is convinced she won't end up like the others.
Look at your eyes. I mean, your eyes are now so excited I can hardly believe it's the same person.
It is.
Feel good?
Yeah.
But it's addictive.
If that's what you call it, it's very, yes.
It's addictive.
I'm aware.
Your friends who get on this, you know what happens to them?
Mm-hmm.
They can't stop.
I know, and they get like crazy. They
So who are you, Superwoman?
No, no.
You think you can stay off of it?
I know. I know I can.
But Maria is probably deluding herself. And as doctors grapple to find ways to break the addiction of crack, those who are struggling to rebuild ruined lives say the only surefire way to stop is not to start.
It is, in every sense of the word, suicide, slow suicide. The only thing is, in suicide, with suicide, it's like quick. This is slow death.
That makes it both torture and suicide. It's terrible.
It certainly does, Hugh. We shouldn't be too pessimistic because, after all, some of these people who are talking about death and suicide, with treatment, they're alive, so there's some success in that.
And then, you know, the other side of that is it's true that there's no cure for crack addiction, and you can save your life by getting off this stuff, but I understand the craving doesn't leave you.
It's a lifetime thing, and they are making some progress. But we found IV drug users who are afraid of contracting AIDS through needle use, now more and more are turning to crack. So they're going to get rid of one devil and have another one on their shoulders.
Yeah, a real problem. Thank you, Tom. And it is serious. In its worst form, it can actually prove fatal. Well, medical researchers have been giving increased attention to snoring. And to find out what they've found out, we visited sleep labs around the country. And John Stossel has found some world-class snorers.
Everybody jokes about snoring, but to these people, it's not funny. They say their snoring is so loud, it's made a mess of their lives.
2 months after the wedding, I said, it's not because I don't love you, but we have to sit down and talk. You get the bed 1 week, and I'll take the couch. And then I'll take the bed, and you get the couch. We had to split up. You cannot sleep.
He was that loud?
You
register on the Richter scale.
You really do. It's very bad.
Could you imitate it?
No. it's just worse. 10 times worse, and it's constant.
The whole house shakes. My kids leave the house. My wife would sleep outside.
What do you mean, leave the house?
Would sleep in a tent.
A tent in the backyard?
It was terrible. It was really bad.
I've lost a lot of relationships. Women that just could not put up with the sound.
When our kids were little, my son once said, Mommy, there's a motorcycle here in the house. And I, no, darling, just your dad.
Now, if you snore, there is no shortage of companies eager to sell you products that they claim may help. These are just a few of them. Some are pretty strange. The snore band, for example. You put the headband here and hook these things in your nostrils, and that supposedly gives you more air and stops you from snoring. Experts we showed this to reacted by laughing. The experts said this one probably won't help much either. It's supposed to keep your mouth shut and keep you from snoring that way. I don't know how you're supposed to sleep with it. Then there's the snore stopper. It's attached to this microphone, and every time you snore, it gives you a shock, and that supposedly stops the snoring without waking you up. Trouble is, someone who tried it said, it did wake me up. It also woke me up whenever the bed sheets rustled or my wife made a noise. Probably more effective, said the experts, is the tongue retaining device. You put your tongue in here and somehow sleep with this thing in your mouth. Or you may want to try the anti-snoring shirt. It's got a little pocket in the back. You put a tennis ball in here, and that supposedly keeps you from sleeping on your back. Finally, lots of companies sell anti-snoring pillows. The principle behind them is the same. They tilt your head back and open the air passage that way. And again, the experts said these might help. But because snoring sometimes is more than just a nuisance, using things like this may do you more harm than good.
Snoring is only an alarm that something is going wrong. So if you snore regularly at night, have it checked by someone who knows, and don't buy a device, because what you will do is turn off the alarm and don't treat the cause.
The cause, in many cases, is something called sleep apnea. Dr. Gilles Minot gave the disease its name. He and other experts estimate that 5 million Americans have this problem. Sleep apnea is different from common social snoring in that sleep apneics actually stop breathing between snores. As a result, they wake up dozens of times during the night, and they're exhausted the next day. The cause is usually too much tissue in the throat or too narrow an air passage. It means their throats simply close while they're trying to sleep. Look inside a normal snorer's throat. The noise is made because the soft palate vibrates against the back of the throat. An apneic's throat closes altogether and stops him from breathing. Then he snores explosively, so he can breathe again. Not only is this loud, but since it keeps the snorer from getting a good night's sleep, it creates problems during the day.
George Herringer is a telephone linesman.
I was always tired. Like one time I was on a telephone pole, I didn't tell my wife, I was for a phone company. I actually fell asleep on a pole once.
On the telephone pole, up in the air?
Oh, 25 feet up. Not realizing I fell asleep. What had happened, I hit my pole, my head hit the pole on my hard hat. That's how I woke up.
I'd go right out. My mother almost disowned me. She lives in Florida, and I used to call her up, find out how she is, and fall asleep on the phone talking to her,
New York City detective Jerry Avellino kept cracking his car up.
I hit a tree once, and hit a fire hydrant once. The last time I hit the tree, I flipped over on the roof and totaled the car out.
Rolled the car over?
Rolled it over.
But you weren't hurt?
Just sprained my shoulder.
Didn't you think there was a real problem and maybe you should stop driving?
Yeah, it never dawned on me that there was a problem with that.
Wait a sec, you fall asleep 4 times?
I know, but I could never figure out what it was.
He kept going to doctors who said, "We don't know what's wrong." Only when he went to a sleep lab did he get help.
This is the control room of a sleep laboratory at University Hospital in Stony Brook, New York. This is where you go to find out if you're just a social snorer or if you really have a problem. You come here and they watch you while you sleep.
Machines measure your heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing. Detective Avellino comes here for tests. You can see his problem. He snores and then stops breathing. His lips move as he struggles to get air.
This here means that he's just holding his breath all this time.
That's absolutely correct. He is not breathing.
30, 40 seconds?
That's right, and his blood oxygen is dropping like a stone to levels that are usually not thought to be compatible with life.
After not breathing for about half a minute, he finally pulls air in with an explosive snore.
Now, if that happens to you 400 or 500 times a night while you're sleeping, you've had a bigger workout in your sleep than you would if you were running a marathon.
The treatment for Jerry? A CPAP machine. It opens his airway by forcing air down into his throat past the heavy soft tissue. Every night he sleeps with this thing on his face.
Does it help?
Definitely.
Big difference?
I haven't nodded out once since.
You can sleep with this bug on your face?
Well, occasionally it bothers me, but for the most part it's pretty good.
It's a good thing he got help, because this is a nasty problem.
It will destroy your family life. It will lead decreasing memory. It will induce sexual problem, behavior problem, personality changes, lead to probably high blood pressure in a certain number of cases, and if it goes further, heart attack, stroke, and eventually death.
The doctors told this man if he didn't get treatment, he'd be dead in 3 months.
I'd die of cardiac arrest in the middle of the night. I would probably wake up because of the pain, and then I would die in a great deal of pain. He scared me. He got my attention.
Charles James is a 41-year-old part-time magician. He got help at a sleep center at Stanford University. Now, most people with sleep apnea are overweight men.
Shannon, will you take care of this little dog for me?
Most, but not all. 5-year-old Shannon Bingham is a patient here, too.
And I have one other balloon I'd like to give you, too. But I want you to make me a promise that you'll never break it. Will you promise? Here's my heart.
Being in a hospital is pretty scary for a 5-year-old, so Charles tries to cheer her up.
Do you have to wear the machine when you go to sleep? Does it help you sleep better? Do you remember the difference between when you didn't have the machine and when you have it? What was it like when you didn't have it?
Snored.
Yeah. And woke up a lot during the night? I snored too.
Today, Shannon and Charles are both using the CPAP machine. It's now the most common and most successful treatment for this disease. If it fails, the doctors may suggest surgery.
This is Shannon Bingham, who's 5 years old. She was falling asleep in kindergarten.
They considered 2 kinds of surgery. Sometimes they go into the throat and cut away the extra tissue that's blocking the airway. Sometimes they open the airway by moving the jaw. This man had that operation. Not only did it cure his apnea, but I think he looks better. Surgery, however, is the treatment of last resort, and even it works only some of the time. So far, the CPAP is working for Shannon, and she will not be getting surgery. Now, before you consider any serious treatment, sleep experts say there are some things you can do on your own.
I think a simple social snorer probably should avoid alcohol at night, should avoid sleep medications, sedatives, and likely probably should try to lose weight.
Losing weight often helps because it reduces the extra tissue in the throat. If that doesn't work, consider a sleep lab. An evaluation costs about $1,000. If they determine that you have sleep apnea, they most likely will put you on the CPAP machine. It doesn't look pleasant, but most of the time it works wonders.
It's helped so that I can stay in the same room all night.
I'm vivacious, alive, moving, going. I don't get uptight. It's a complete difference in my life.
We feel it's so important to let people know about this illness. When you have an illness that is treatable, where there's so much you can do to help people, then I think it's just a shame for people not to know about it, for doctors not to know about it. So this is something where you can truly change somebody's life.
I have a stranger in bed with me, my wife.
Yeah, from the first night I've been able to sleep in that room now. Yeah. I don't have to leave, so that's nice.
Saves the marriage. But do you have to wear this all your life if you have this problem?
Probably. The researchers at Stony Brook are working on a drug that seems to work on rats, but they haven't tested it on people yet. So probably, unless they lose the weight, for the rest of their lives. But they don't mind. They say it's worth it.
John, I know you touched on this in the piece, but how do you know if you really need this, you know, if you may die, or whether you're just, you know, kind of, you snore?
What the scientists call social snorers. Well, the social snorers just make noise. If you have sleep apnea, you stop breathing. So this is something you may not know if you sleep alone. Someone has to watch you sleep and see that you stop breathing and then gasp. Plus, if you're really sleepy during the day, then get help.
Fascinating. Thank you. And I wanted to share my impressions with you. As we know, General Secretary and Mrs. Gorbachev paid a visit to New York, and interest was so enormous that virtually their every move, every utterance or reaction was considered newsworthy. Well, on Wednesday, Mrs. Marcela Perez de Cuellar, the charming wife of the Secretary General of the United Nations, gave a small luncheon for Mrs. Gorbachev. And I was frankly delighted to have been included here, being greeted by Mrs. Perez de Cuellar. You know, I must say, just to see the wives of the President of the United States, the President-elect of the United States, and the leader of the Soviet Union all together is mind-boggling. Little is known of Mrs. Gorbachev's private life, but during a conversation before lunch on the joys of grandchildren, she revealed that she had two. This fact isn't known in Russia, nor was it certain here. I've met Mrs. Gorbachev twice before. A former professor of philosophy, she is friendly, informed, confident, and speaks her mind. Ah, but you ask, what about Mrs. Gorbachev and Mrs. Reagan? Well, before lunch, Mrs. G gave a bit of a lecture about how our two countries should be more open. But haven't we been? Exclaimed Mrs. R. No reaction from Mrs. G. Still at the table, all was fine. We are fortunate destiny introduced us at this historic time, said Mrs. Gorbachev to a gracious Mrs. Reagan. And I, for one, never attended a more historic luncheon for the ladies. Of course, the next day, the Gorbachevs had to return home to cope with their country's tragedy. And now let's see what Ted Koppel has for us in tonight's Nightline. Ted?